I thought HOAs only sent letters. Mine sent two men in black uniforms. They didn't knock, they didn't call. They just stood at my gate, completely still, for 6 straight hours. And when I finally walked out there, they didn't ask for money. They demanded I apologize to Karen, the same woman who tried to steal my property 2 years ago. But what really chilled me? The woman's voice whispering through their radio. If you'd asked me a year ago what frightened me most, I would have said storms. Real Texas storms. The kind that shake windows, rip shingles off roofs, and make cattle scatter like they can sense God passing over the pasture. But storms aren't always loud. Some approach on quiet feet, some learn your routines, some memorize your gate code even when you never gave it to them, and some carry HOA badges. For nearly 2 years, Julia and I lived a peaceful life after the lawsuit that put Karen's HOA in its place. Our house sat just outside Austin, tucked behind a row of old pecan trees that creaked in the wind like they were whispering secrets to each other. The air was usually soft out there, lazy, slow, predictable. That was the whole point. Predictable meant safe. We'd chosen that house because it was comfortably outside the HOA's reach, 5 blocks beyond their imaginary kingdom, as my attorney once joked. I paid every fee, filed every document, checked every plat map before we bought it. I didn't cut corners, I didn't leave things to chance. And for a long time, everything was fine. Julia worked nights at the hospital, the kind of shifts that turn minutes into hours and hours into something heavier. She'd come home tired but smiling, drop her bag, and fall asleep before the kettle finished boiling. I kept the place quiet for her. No power tools during mornings, no hammering on the porch, nothing that would disturb her rest. We had a rhythm, a routine, a small, quiet life. So when she walked into the kitchen one morning with a crease between her brows, I noticed right away. "Danny," she said softly, "someone was by the gate last night." I looked up from my coffee. "An animal, maybe?" "No," she said, shaking her head slowly. "People. I heard whispering. And I smelled cigarette smoke." That caught my attention. I don't smoke. None of our close neighbors do either, and the smell of a cigarette at 2 in the morning on our gravel road wasn't exactly normal. Still, I told her what any husband would tell his exhausted wife. "I'll check the cameras. It's probably nothing." But it wasn't nothing. The motion sensor had picked up a shape, a human-sized blur, standing just behind the pecan tree at 2:43 a.m. No clear face, no details, just a person, standing far too still for far too long. I stared at that frame longer than I'd like to admit. The next morning, Julia found fresh boot prints on the gravel. A different morning, she heard the gate rattle. Another day, she saw a flash of light, like someone checking a watch or a phone, just beyond the fence. Little pieces, small moments, nothing big enough on its own, but together, they drew a shape. I should have trusted her instincts sooner. She works in an ER. She knows the difference between nerves and danger. Then came the envelope, not mailed, not stamped, just placed in our box by hand. Cheap black ink. Inside, "This isn't over." Those 3 words felt like a cold hand on my shoulder. I didn't tell Julia right away. She had enough on her mind, but something in the air changed after that. The house didn't feel as warm at night. The trees didn't sound the same when the wind passed through them. Even our quiet road felt occupied somehow, like we weren't alone out there anymore. And looking back, I should have known. Silence doesn't always mean safety. Sometimes it's just the inhale before the next blow. Because while we were trying to return to our normal life, someone else, someone who still held a grudge, was already making their move. I just didn't realize the next storm would arrive standing perfectly still at my gate. For a few days after that envelope showed up, I tried very hard to pretend life was normal. Not because I believed it, but because I needed to. If you've ever lived through harassment, you know the quiet afterward can feel almost narcotic. You cling to it, even when you know it's temporary. But Julia, she didn't cling to anything. She observed. 3 nights in a row, she came home from the hospital with the same uneasy look in her eyes, the one she usually reserved for patients who weren't telling the whole truth. "Danny," she said one morning while untying her shoes, "I swear I heard someone breathing near the gate." "Breathing?" I asked. She nodded. It wasn't an animal, too steady, too slow. I felt a prickle at the back of my neck. It's amazing how the human mind tries to protect itself with denial. Mine did anyway. Maybe a jogger, I offered. At 2:15 in the morning, she replied, raising an eyebrow. Fair point. That afternoon, while she slept, I walked the length of the property line. The pecan trees cast long shadows on the dirt, and even though the sun was out, I felt something heavy in the air. I checked the gate, the hinges, the gravel outside. That's when I noticed them again, the boot prints. This time they were deeper, heavier, more deliberate. Someone had been standing in the same exact spot for a long time. The gravel had settled around the shape of the sole, almost like it had been pressed in by someone carrying a lot of weight, or someone who just refused to move. My stomach tightened. Later that day, Julia and I sat on the porch swing as the sun dipped behind the trees. She broke the silence first. I don't think this is random, she said. I sighed. I know. You think it's HOA related? I didn't want to answer, but the truth came out anyway. I think somebody still believes Karen Little deserves a victory she didn't get. Julia rested her head on my shoulder, quiet for a long moment. You remember that case you won? She asked. Every time you mentioned it, you said the same thing. People like Karen don't lose quietly. She was right. Karen was the type who memorized grudges like other people memorize birthdays. If she couldn't win legally, she'd reach for other methods: social pressure, new rules, intimidation disguised as procedure. It was her style, but sending people to skulk around my house at night, that was new. The next morning, something else happened. Julia was pouring coffee when she froze, staring out the kitchen window. What's wrong? I asked. She pointed. There, wedged in the seam of the gate, was a folded piece of paper, white, thin, barely held in place by a sliver of metal. I walked out and pulled it free. Same handwriting as before, same cheap ink, same feeling in my chest. But this time, the message was different. We haven't forgotten you. I felt the world tilt a little, a small, subtle shift, like the sensation you get when you step on an uneven stair. Julia stepped closer. Danny, this isn't just some prank. Somebody is watching us. I looked at her, really looked at her. The exhaustion in her eyes from long shifts, the worry tightening her jaw, the way her fingers twitched against her mug. She wasn't afraid for herself. She was afraid for me. That did something to me inside. I went straight to the office and pulled up the porch camera footage for the last week. I must have watched it 10 times. Rewinding the same blurry shape slipping in and out of frame. It wasn't much, but the stillness of that figure, the patience, it made my skin crawl. People with honest intentions don't stand motionless on private property for long stretches of the night. And then there was the sound, a faint scrape, metal brushing metal, at exactly 3:21 a.m. Julia was right. Someone touched the gate, and not lightly. At that moment, the last shred of denial in me died. The envelope wasn't a coincidence. The footprints weren't random. The whispering wasn't my imagination. Someone was circling our home, someone patient, someone familiar with harassment, and someone who didn't care if Julia was alone at night. What I didn't know yet was just how close they were willing to get. A few days passed with no new notes, no new shadows on the camera, no strange sounds by the gate. I tried to convince myself that maybe, just maybe, things were settling down. But peace after fear doesn't feel like peace. It feels like someone's holding their breath. That's why I wasn't surprised when trouble finally knocked. Except this time, it didn't come to my door. It came from the neighbors. I was tightening a loose board on the back fence when I saw Linda from 2 houses down, waving a stack of papers like they were on fire. Danny, you seen this? She called. Her voice was sharp, but the worry underneath it was sharper. I wiped my hands on my jeans and met her halfway down the road. She handed me the papers, 4 pages stapled together with the HOA's bold blue logo at the top. Notice of boundary realignment effective immediately, my jaw clenched. I read through the paragraphs. Expanded jurisdiction, updated district map, community cohesion zone, compliance guidelines. Words dressed up nice enough to hide what they really were, an attempted land grab. Again. But the map on page 3 made me go still. My property was marked in gray, a shade different than the others. Julia stepped beside me, reading over my shoulder. What does that mean? She asked. I exhaled slowly. It means they want us again. Linda rubbed her forehead. Danny, this isn't legal, right? They can't redraw things without approval. They can draw whatever they want, I said. Doesn't make it real. but the feeling in my stomach didn't match the confidence in my voice. I flipped through the packet and noticed something important, something only someone who had fought these battles before would catch. There were no county seals, no official signatures, no filing numbers, just HOA formatting and printer ink. Fake authority. Classic Karen tactics. Only this time, Karen wasn't signed anywhere. The document listed a temporary acting board. Right, I could practically hear Karen writing it from whatever hole she was hiding in. That night, Julia and I sat at the dining table with the boundary packet spread across the wood surface like pieces of a puzzle. "You think she's behind this?" Julia asked. I didn't have to think. Yes, but she disappeared. "People like her don't disappear," I said. "They regroup." Julia leaned back, arms crossed, eyes sharp. "You know what bothers me most?" she said softly. "This part here." She tapped the third page. "Look how the new boundary line curves. It doesn't expand evenly. It bends around certain houses and pushes into others." She was right. Some properties were oddly exempt. Others, like mine, were the exact targets. "This isn't a neighborhood plan," she continued. "This is personal." She wasn't wrong. When I set the papers down, something caught my eye, something small but loud enough to make my pulse jump. A handwritten note at the bottom of Linda's packet. "Sorry you're caught in this. G." Julia saw it too. "You think that's Glenn?" she asked. "Has to be." It made sense. Glenn used to be the treasurer. He knew maps, budgets, filings. He'd know if something wasn't right, and he'd know who to warn. But something else hit me. If Glenn was warning neighbors quietly, slipping notes into packets, it meant he was afraid. Afraid of being seen helping. Afraid of Karen. Or whoever was acting in her place. I folded the packet and set it down. "This isn't just paperwork," I said. "It's preparation." Preparation for what? I hesitated, because saying the truth out loud made it heavier. For whatever they're planning next. Julia didn't flinch. She just reached for the laptop and pulled up the security camera feeds. Every angle, every timestamp, every shadow. She wasn't scared anymore. She was ready. "I think we need to look closer," she said. "If they're getting bold again, we need to be smarter this time." I nodded. Because deep down, I knew something simple and terrifying. People don't stand outside your house at 3 a.m, unless they plan to come back in daylight. And whoever wanted my property so badly, they weren't done trying, not even close. I didn't hear Glenn walk up the driveway. What I heard was the soft creak of old boots on gravel, the sound a man makes when he doesn't want to be noticed. When I stepped out onto the porch, he was standing there with both hands in his pockets, shoulders hunched like someone expecting bad weather. "Morning, Danny," he said quietly. He looked older than I remembered. Not physically, he was already in his late 60s, but in the way a man ages when he's been carrying something too heavy for too long. "Glenn," I said, trying to sound friendly. "Everything all right?" He swallowed before answering. "Mind if I talk to you for a minute, privately?" That was never a good start. I walked him around to the side of the house where we kept the extra lumber stacked under the eaves. Julia stayed inside for a moment, but I saw her silhouette at the window, watching, listening, reading Glenn's posture like an ER doctor reads a patient's pulse. He took a breath. "I wasn't sure if I should come," he began, "but I saw the packet Linda showed you, and I figured you ought to know the truth before things go any further." "The truth about what?" He looked around again, like he expected Karen herself to step out of the bushes. "About what happened when I left the HOA board," he said. "About Karen. And about what she's doing now." My chest tightened, not from fear, but recognition. The way he said her name, like someone saying the name of a predator. "Go on," I said. Glenn pressed his hands together, rubbing his thumbs like he was trying to warm them. "You remember when I stepped down as treasurer last year?" "Yeah, I heard you retired." He gave a small, broken laugh. "I didn't retire. I was forced out." The words hung in the air a second before they sank in. Glenn continued. "Karen wanted me to sign off on some creative accounting, numbers that didn't match, invoices that didn't exist, payments routed through places they shouldn't be." His voice dropped lower. "And when I refused, she told me she'd report me to the county for financial misconduct." I felt my jaw tighten. "Did she have anything on you?" "No," he said quickly. "Nothing at all. But she knew all she had to do was accuse me. At my age, that's enough to ruin a man. He looked down at his boots. She threatened to drag my name through the mud, said I'd go down for embezzlement unless I cooperated. She even drafted a resignation letter for me and told me it would look better if I stepped aside willingly. That was Karen, all right. She didn't need the truth, she just needed leverage. I felt Julia step quietly out onto the porch behind us, her presence calm but razor sharp. Glenn noticed her and stiffened, but she gave him a small nod, urging him to continue. "There's something else," he said, reaching into his jacket. He pulled out a small flash drive, plain, black, worn around the edges. "I kept copies," he whispered. "Emails, draft documents, memos about expanding the HOA boundary." She told the board it was to strengthen community value, but privately, he glanced at Julia. Privately, she said she wanted to make an example out of certain homeowners. "Certain homeowners like who?" Julia asked, her voice steady. Glenn's eyes met mine. "Like you, Danny." For a moment, I didn't speak. The wind shifted through the pecan branches overhead, carrying the faint dry rustle of leaves moving across the ground. The sound suddenly felt too loud. Glenn went on. "She blamed you for everything, for her humiliation in court, for the money the HOA lost in legal fees, for what she called a stain on her leadership. She told the board that when the time was right, she'd bring your property into the HOA, one way or another." Julia stepped off the porch and moved closer. "Why are you telling us all this now?" she asked gently. Glenn's throat bobbed. "Because things are getting worse. The new boundary realignment? That's her. She's not gone. She's working from behind the curtain. She's got people who will still do whatever she asks." He took a shaky breath. "And because I owe you both an apology, I knew this was coming. I saw the signs, but I didn't speak up. I let her scare me into silence." I put a hand on his shoulder. "Glenn, you're speaking now." His eyes watered, just a little. "Yeah," he said, "but I'm afraid it might be too late." Julia looked at me, then at Glenn. "It's not too late," she said calmly, "but if you have something else, anything at all, you need to tell us, because she's already circling this house. Danny's seen it. I've seen it." Glenn nodded and pressed the drive into my hand. "There's more on there," he whispered, "more than you want to know." I slipped it into my pocket, and even before I looked at a single file, I knew one thing with chilling certainty. Karen wasn't rebuilding an HOA. She was rebuilding a vendetta. And Glenn was the first crack in the dam. That night felt heavier than most. The air wasn't just still, it was posed like the world was holding itself perfectly still so it wouldn't give anything away. Even the cicadas were quiet, and out here in Central Texas, that's not normal. Silence out here means only one of two things: a predator nearby or a storm building. Julia sat curled up on the couch, blanket around her shoulders, her eyes flicking toward the front window every few minutes. She wasn't scared. Julia isn't built that way, but she was hyper-aware. ER nurses develop that sixth sense, the one that whispers when something's coming before the rest of us notice. "You feel that?" she asked softly. I did. I felt it in my bones. The house didn't feel empty. It felt observed. Watched from a distance close enough to sense, but far enough not to see. That's the kind of quiet that puts a man's instincts on edge. I locked the front door out of habit, something I didn't normally do until bedtime. Then I checked the porch camera feed, scrolling through the last hour. Nothing but the sway of the pecan branches and a moth beating itself senseless against the porch light. But something still felt wrong. Around 11:30, Julia went upstairs to shower. The house hummed with the familiar sounds: pipes, old wood settling, the faint noise of water running through copper. Nothing unusual, nothing alarming. But when the shower turned off, I heard it. A sound I've come to recognize too well, the metallic tremor of the front gate being touched. Not opened, not shaken, just touched. I stepped toward the window. At first I didn't see anything, but then, under the pale wash of the moonlight, I caught a glint of something reflective. Not eyes, not an animal. Metal. Someone's belt buckle or badge catching the moon. I froze where I stood, and for 5 long seconds, whoever was out there froze too. Just stillness, like we were both waiting for the other to move first. Then the glint slipped backwards, melting into the shadows near the fence. I wanted to fling the door open and shout, or grab a flashlight and chase the shape into the night, but something deep inside me said, "Don't. Not yet." Not until I knew more. Julia came down the stairs in pajamas, towel around her shoulders. She stopped halfway when she saw my face. What happened? I chose my words carefully. Someone's out there. She didn't panic. She didn't gasp. She simply exhaled and walked to the monitor, flipping through each camera angle with steady fingers. At camera 3, facing the gate, she leaned in closer. Danny, look at the dirt. There, just barely visible, was a fresh trail across the gravel. Not footprints, drag marks. Like someone pivoted on their heel to step away, but kept one foot planted just long enough to grind a line into the dirt. Someone had been standing in the exact same spot again, watching our house, listening. Julia swallowed. This is the 3rd night in a row. We're not imagining things, I said quietly. No, she agreed. Someone is scouting. That word, scouting, settled in my gut like a stone, because scouting means intention. Scouting means counting steps, measuring responses, timing routines, and that means whoever was out there had a plan. I walked the house once more, checking windows, testing locks, making sure Julia felt safe. But deep down, I already knew safety wasn't the issue. The issue was time. This wasn't random harassment. This wasn't bored teenagers. This wasn't even the remnants of the HOA sniffing around out of habit. This was preparation. And when predators prepare, they don't wait long before making their move. That night, neither of us slept well. Every time the wind shifted, we stirred. Every time a squirrel ran across the roof, one of us sat up. Even the dog 2 houses down barked at shadows until he wore himself out. Just before dawn, I checked the gate once more. There were boot prints, fresh ones, facing the house. Whoever they were. They weren't just watching, they were counting down. Sunday mornings are supposed to be slow. Coffee, sunlight, maybe a quiet drive to town if we were out of groceries. That was all I had in mind when I stepped onto the porch that day. Nothing dramatic, nothing dangerous. Just normal life trying to assert itself. I hit the button on my key fob. The SUV chirped in response. Then I rounded the corner toward the gate and stopped dead. 2 men stood just outside the fence, not walking, not approaching, not talking, just standing. Perfectly upright, shoulder to shoulder, like statues placed by someone with a cruel sense of humor. Both wore black uniforms, heavy fabric, too formal for security guards, too tactical for neighborhood watch. Silver badges glinted on their chests, radios clipped to their shoulders, boots planted firm. But the strangest part wasn't how they looked, it was how still they were. Men waiting for instructions shift their weight. Men lingering around a property look around. These 2 didn't move at all. My first thought wasn't fear. It was the memory of the camera footage Glenn hinted at. The shadows, the boot prints, the breathing Julia heard at the gate. This wasn't their first visit. It was just the first time they let themselves be seen. I approached slowly, each step crunching the gravel under my boots. The taller one, buzz cut, jaw like a granite block, his name tag read Sean, didn't blink until I was 10 feet away. The smaller one, a wiry man with nervous eyes, James, kept glancing at Sean like he needed permission to breathe. I stopped at the gate. "This private property," I said quietly. "Something you boys need?" No answer, just the faint wind brushing past us and the metallic rattle of one radio somewhere between channels. A soft voice crackled through it, a woman's voice, calm, controlled. Julia's words echoed in my head. I heard someone whispering out there. Finally, Sean stepped forward, chin raised, posture rigid. "Mr. Miller." It wasn't a question. "That's me," I replied. "Who are you?" Instead of answering, he reached inside his jacket and produced an envelope sealed with red wax. Red wax, at my gate, in the sunlight, like some medieval summons dressed up in HOA theatrics. He held it out. I didn't take it yet. I looked him dead in the eye. "Before I open that, why are you here?" Still no answer. James shifted his weight nervously, eyes darting to the driveway, then back at me. Whatever they were doing out there, he didn't want to be the one doing it. I finally took the envelope. In the corner of my vision, I saw Julia pull the curtain inside the house. Not fear, just readiness. I cracked the wax with my thumb and unfolded the single sheet inside. My eyes skimmed the first line, then the second. And then I felt the first spark of anger rumble somewhere low in my chest. Formal request for apology to Ms. Karen Little, for psychological distress caused by your legal actions. Below that, a voluntary restitution amount, $7,500 to aid in her emotional recovery. I stared at it, then lifted my gaze to the two men. "You're serious," I said flatly. Sean nodded once, too stiff, too rehearsed. "You don't understand," he said. "She's been through a lot. You humiliated her in court. She's still recovering." "No," I said. "She humiliated herself. All I did was show the judge the truth." James flinched like the air between us had cracked. Sean's nostrils flared. "We've been out here since 3, he said quietly. 6 hours. She didn't want to involve the police. She wanted this handled politely. Politely. 2 men in uniform standing outside a private home for 6 hours. Politely. I folded the letter neatly and slid it back into the envelope. "You want polite?" I said calmly. "You start by leaving." James looked relieved. Sean didn't. His jaw tightened. His hand twitched near his radio, and for the first time since stepping outside, I felt the atmosphere shift, like a bird taking flight in a closed room. Something was about to happen. I stepped back toward my SUV, hand on the driver's side handle. The moment metal touched my skin. Thud. A sharp impact hit the back of my head. Then a second, harder, cracked across my jaw. Lights burst behind my eyes. Before I could fully turn, Sean lunged again, fist aimed at my ribs. Pain exploded up my side. James hesitated, just long enough to show he didn't want this, then joined in because following orders was easier than thinking. The world turned sideways. Boots, gravel, a knee slamming into my gut, a fist clipping my temple, a hand gripping my shirt to yank me forward into another punch. I hit the ground, hard. One of them cursed. A boot struck my ribs, another kick. Gravel scraping my cheek. Somewhere, in the ringing haze of my ears, I heard it. A woman's voice speaking through their radio, soft, calm, cold. "That's enough. Leave him." The footsteps retreated. A car door slammed. Tires peeled off the gravel, and I lay there, feeling the warm drip of blood pooling near my ear, staring up at the branches of the pecan tree swaying gently above me, the same tree that had hidden them for nights. They weren't just here for intimidation. They weren't here to deliver a letter. They were here to send a message. Karen Little wasn't gone. She was just sending messengers. When I came to, the world wasn't spinning. It was tilted. A few degrees off center, like someone had taken the whole scene and nudged it sideways. Gravel pressed into my cheek. My ribs felt like someone had stacked bricks on them. For a moment, I couldn't remember why I was outside, or why everything hurt. Then the memories rushed in like a fist to the gut. Sean's punch, James's boot, the red wax envelope, and that voice on the radio, the woman saying, "Did he apologize yet?" I tried to push myself up. Pain lit up my side like a live wire. My SUV was a few feet away, passenger door hanging open, mirror broken loose, a crack across the windshield like a spider web. A small rock sat under the wiper blade, mocking me. My phone was still in my pocket, screen shattered but alive. I hovered over "emergency call," then stopped. I needed to see the footage first. I staggered toward the porch, one hand on the fender, then the railing. Each breath stabbed like a knife. Inside, I went straight to the security monitor. My vision blurred, but I found the timestamp easily. 3:02 a.m. 2 silhouettes at my gate, not pacing, not talking, just waiting. Hours crawled by, 4, 5, 6, and they never moved. When 9:47 rolled around, I watched a recording of myself step out onto the porch, completely unaware. At 9:50, Sean hit me. Even knowing it was coming, I flinched. Watching your own body fold under a punch is a strange, detached kind of pain, like it's happening to someone who looks like you, but you feel every bit of it anyway. The second blow, the knee, the kick, and then me collapsing to the gravel like a rag doll. That was enough. I called 911. The dispatcher's voice was steady, mine wasn't. Sirens came fast. Julia's voice came faster, panicked, cracking, too loud for how much my head hurt. "Danny! Oh my God! Danny!" Paramedics took over. Neck brace, chest wrap, questions I barely answered. The ambulance ride was a blur of ceiling lights and the warm, shaking pressure of Julia's hand gripping mine like I still might slip away. At the hospital, everything dissolved into white walls and clinical voices. 4 cracked ribs, concussion, bruised kidney. Could have been worse, the doctor said. Julia didn't smile. They settled me in a small room with soft lights. The first day disappeared in a fog of pain meds and beeping monitors. On the second morning, Julia sat beside me, not speaking at first. Then she said quietly, "I need to tell you something." I turned to her. "Those men," she whispered, "they weren't just watching you." I frowned. "What do you mean?" She swallowed. "I checked the security feed while you were asleep. They were out there on nights I worked. The shadows move right after I pull in. They knew when I left. They knew when you were alone." The idea of anyone tracking her made something cold settle deep in my chest. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked softly. She squeezed my hand. "Because you were already dealing with your lawsuit. I kept telling myself I was imagining it. I'm not anymore." Before I could respond, someone knocked. Detective Reed stepped in. Plain clothes, tired eyes, a folder under one arm. "Mr. Miller, Mrs. Miller," he said, pulling up a chair. He set a small flash drive on the table. "We reviewed your footage," he said. "It's clear. There was no provocation. They waited 6 hours, then attacked you the moment your back turned." Julia leaned forward. "Are they in custody?" "Both," Reed said. "Denied bail. The DA's charging aggravated assault with intent to cause serious bodily harm." I let out a slow breath, but Reed wasn't finished. "The security company they claim to work for," he continued, "doesn't exist. The EIN belongs to a landscaping business whose owner died 2 years ago." Julia stiffened. "So, who paid them?" Reed tapped the folder. "A discretionary HOA account. And the authorizations for payment," he paused, "came from Karen Little." There it was, the name behind the curtain. Reed slid a printed email toward us. One line was highlighted. "I need him scared, not dead. Keep it quiet. No police, no paper trail." Julia covered her mouth. I felt the sting of adrenaline mixed with something darker, confirmation. "This isn't HOA business anymore," Reed said. "This is coordinated harassment, premeditated, and now violent." He stood, resting a hand on the bed rail. "You were targeted, Mr. Miller, and your wife was watched. You weren't imagining any of it." He pushed the flash drive closer to us. "Backup copy, keep it safe. And if you remember anything else, even small details, call me right away." When he left, the room felt different. Not safer, not quieter exactly, but clearer. Julia held the flash drive in her hand like it weighed 100 pounds. "We're not crazy," she whispered. I nodded slowly, feeling something hard settle inside me. "No," I said, "we're not." And for the first time since the attack, I felt something stronger than fear, resolve. 6 days of antiseptic air, soft shoes shuffling in hallways, nurses whispering to each other in the doorway. It all left a faint hum in my head, like a radio signal that hadn't quite faded. They wrapped my ribs, warned me not to lift anything heavier than a coffee mug, and told me to take it slow. Slow wasn't something I was used to, but I didn't have a choice. Julia drove us home, both hands tight on the wheel, checking the rearview mirror more often than the road. When we turned onto our street, she exhaled the breath she'd been holding since the hospital. The house looked the same, the way danger always does after it's passed. She helped me inside, settled me into the recliner, fetched my medication, and turned on some soft jazz she hoped would calm things down. It almost worked. Almost. Because when she brought me a glass of water, her eyes drifted to the porch camera feed on her phone, just like she had the night before, and the night before that. I didn't call her out on it. I understood. Once you see shadows where safety used to be, you don't unsee them. A day later, word started to spread. Not from the neighbors first, no. From the newspaper. A reporter had gotten the police report and some of the video stills. The Sunday edition carried my story on the front page. Homeowner hospitalized after alleged HOA-linked attack. They kept my name blurred in the photos, but everyone on my street knew exactly who the man on the gravel was, and everyone knew who had been running the HOA. Karen Little. The story hit harder than even Reed predicted. By noon, 3 HOA board members had resigned. By evening, the HOA's Facebook page, usually filled with complaints about grass length or recycling bins, turned into a battlefield. People were angry. People were embarrassed. People were remembering things they had been scared to talk about. She threatened me over my mailbox. She added fees that weren't in the bylaws. She yelled at my kid for chalk drawings. She told us we couldn't call the county without board approval. The list grew by the hour. The next morning, Julia came into the living room, holding her phone like it might bite. "They froze the HOA accounts," she said. "Already?" "Yep. Someone leaked financial records. There's money missing. A lot of it." I didn't say anything at first, partly because talking hurt my ribs, partly because I didn't know what to say. It felt strange, watching something that had dominated your life suddenly crumble like a rotten fence post. By lunchtime, the HOA had officially filed for bankruptcy protection. Someone sent me a screenshot. "The association will temporarily cease operations pending review." Temporarily. Yeah. And I temporarily played linebacker for the Cowboys. I was sitting on the couch later that evening when I heard footsteps on the gravel outside. Slow ones, not hurried, not sneaky, just steady. I sat up straighter, bracing myself, but when the knocking came, it was gentle. Julia opened the door, and there he was, Glenn. Gray-haired, shoulders a little hunched, wearing the same brown vest he'd worn at almost every HOA meeting I'd ever seen him in. He wasn't carrying a clipboard this time, just a hesitant sort of shame in his eyes. "Danny," he said softly, "mind if I come in a moment?" I nodded. He stepped inside, not crossing far, like he wasn't sure he had the right to be in my home. Julia pulled out a chair, but he didn't take it. He stayed standing, hands clasped in front of him. "I heard about what happened," he said. "Everyone has. First, I'm sorry. I'm truly sorry." I studied him. He looked tired in the way a man gets when a burden he's carried for years finally crushes him. "You didn't hit me," I said. "No," he replied, "but I also didn't stop what led to it." He took a breath. "I was treasurer for 11 years. Karen, she wasn't always like this, but she changed, got more controlling, more erratic. Some of us pushed back quietly, tried to question invoices, ask why she needed discretionary funds. She shut us out." "Why didn't you leave?" Julia asked gently. He lowered his eyes. "Because I was a coward." The words hung there between us. He rubbed his palms together slowly. "I knew she was retaliating against you, Danny. I knew she forged that annexation claim. I knew the vote numbers didn't add up. But confronting her," he shook his head. "She made examples of people. You know that now." I didn't argue. He wasn't wrong. He tugged a folded piece of paper from his pocket. "This is all I came to say. A lot of us feel responsible, and we're sorry. You didn't deserve this." He hesitated, then added quietly, "You weren't the only one she threatened." I straightened a bit. "Who else?" "Families," he whispered. "Elderly residents. Anyone who questioned her. She used fear as a tool, and we let her." He looked up, eyes wet but steady. "You weren't wrong to fight her. You were just alone in it longer than you should have been." Julia reached out, touched his arm, a small gesture, but one that softened the space between us. Glenn nodded once more and stepped back toward the door. As he opened it, he said one last thing, almost to himself. "Bankruptcy ends a corporation. It doesn't end a vendetta." Then he walked away, his footsteps fading into the dusk. Julia closed the door and leaned against it, exhaling. "What do you think he meant?" she asked. I shook my head. "I don't know, but it didn't sound like closure. It didn't feel like closure either. The HOA had fallen. The board had scattered. Karen had vanished. But the quiet settling over our home wasn't peace. It was the pause before someone flips the next page. 3 nights after Glenn's visit, I woke to the sound of gravel crunching outside. Not loud, not hurried, just deliberate. Julia stirred beside me. She'd learned to sleep light since the attack. I put a hand gently on her arm. "It's okay," I whispered. "Stay here." I eased out of bed. Pain tugged at my ribs, not as sharp as before, but enough to remind me I wasn't healed. I slipped on boots, grabbed the flashlight by the dresser, and stepped into the hallway. The house was dark except for the soft glow of the porch nightlight. The second I opened the front door, I saw a shape standing near the edge of the porch. Not a stranger. Glenn. Same vest, same stooped shoulders. But something was different. Fear. A kind I hadn't seen on him before. He didn't wait for me to speak. "Danny," he whispered, glancing over his shoulder, as if the shadows themselves were listening. "I'm sorry to come this late, but I didn't know who else to trust." I opened the screen door. "Glenn, what's—" He pushed a small brown folder into my hand. It was surprisingly heavy for its size. "You need to have this," he said. "I should have given it to Detective Reed, but if I'm honest, I don't know how deep this goes, and I didn't want it disappearing." He stepped inside quickly, closing the door behind him like he was sealing something out. Julia appeared at the end of the hallway, tying her robe, eyes wide. "Glenn, what's happening?" He swallowed. "Karen." That was enough to pull us both fully awake. He took a seat at the kitchen table, wiping sweat from his forehead with a trembling hand. "I told you she threatened people," he said. "What I didn't tell you is, I kept records, copies." She didn't know I still had access to parts of the cloud backup from the HOA's old system, the one before she forced us to transfer to her preferred vendor. I don't think she ever realized the old archive still synced. He tapped the folder. "What's in there," he whispered, "is worse than anything I imagined, and I already imagined plenty." I sat across from him and slowly opened the folder. Inside was a single USB drive, black, scratched along the sides, a faded label that read simply, Archive B, Resolution Files. Julia pulled out her laptop from the kitchen drawer and plugged it in. Glenn reached out, grabbing her wrist before she could press anything. "Before you open it," he said, voice cracking, "I need you both to understand something." We stared at him. "She didn't just retaliate against you, Danny. She planned it. She documented it. She treated people like obstacles." He rubbed his face, shaking his head. "I've looked at some of the files. Not all. I couldn't. But what I did see..." He paused, breathing unsteadily. "She didn't want you fined. She didn't want you sued. She wanted you broken." Julia and I exchanged a look. Then she clicked open the first file on the drive. The folder contained dozens of items, Word docs, spreadsheets, audio files, low-resolution photos from what looked like old phones or cheap cameras. The first file was titled Mitigation Protocol, DM, my initials. Julia clicked it. A PDF opened. Cold, clinical, bullet points. Subject profile, DM, male, mid-40s, tradesman background, low community engagement, unlikely to seek mediation. Goal, discourage, destabilize, isolate. Phase 1, paper pressure. Create infractions, fencing, mailbox, decor. Deliver notices without stamps to avoid postal record. Establish pattern of non-compliance. Julia whispered, "She made it all up. Every single notice." I kept reading. Phase 2, social erosion. Suggest non-compliance to neighbors. Quietly imply safety concerns regarding subject. Encourage community discomfort. Julia put a hand over her mouth. She tried to turn people against us. My stomach tightened. Then, Phase 3, leverage vulnerabilities. Wife works night shifts. Subject alone most mornings. Limited immediate visibility from neighbors. Julia's face went pale. "She wrote that," she whispered. "She actually wrote that." Then the line that made my blood run cold. Phase 4, persuasion via contracted enforcement. Note, must be off record. No HOA branded paperwork. The document ended abruptly after that. Glenn closed his eyes, unable to watch. "She took out the rest," he said. "I think she moved Phase 4 into audio files." Julia clicked the folder titled Audio Logs. There were 6 recordings, all unlabeled except for timestamps. She clicked the first one. Karen's voice filled the kitchen like a cold draft. "I don't want cops involved. That ruins everything. It needs to look like instability on his part, a hot temper, a man who can't control himself." Another file. "If he pushes back, escalate. He embarrassed me. He cost us money. He needs to learn there are consequences." Another. "I need him scared, not dead. You hear me? Scared. Enough to make him compliant." Julia's hands shook as she clicked the next one. The voice was quieter, like she was speaking from inside a car. "His wife leaves at 6:45 p.m. The hospital shift ends at 7 a.m. He's alone from 8 to 10 most mornings. He thinks he's clever with his cameras." Julia turned to me, her eyes glistening with anger and fear. She was tracking me. I forced myself to stay calm, but my pulse hammered in my ears. She clicked the final audio file. This one wasn't Karen, it was Sean. "We're at the gate. Been here since 3. He'll come out eventually. We'll get the apology one way or another." A pause. Then Karen's voice, icy and steady. "Good. Make it count." Julia closed the laptop. The silence in the kitchen seemed to stretch towards something unspoken, electric. Glenn looked up, eyes rimmed red. That's all I could copy before the old archive started locking me out. I think Karen noticed someone accessed it. I stared at the USB drive. This, I said quietly, goes to Detective Reed, first thing tomorrow. Glenn nodded. Do that. And Danny, be careful. When Karen feels cornered, she doesn't retreat. She lunges. He stood, gripping the back of the chair for a moment as if steadying himself. I should go before I make things worse, he said softly. Julia walked him to the door. When it closed, the house felt too quiet again. But this time, it wasn't fear. It was resolve sharpening into something solid. I looked at the USB drive on the table. Tomorrow, things were going to change, one way or another. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Karen's voice again. Cold, controlled, like she was giving instructions to a machine instead of human beings. If he pushes back, escalate. His wife leaves at 6:45. Make it count. The USB sat on the kitchen table like it was humming with electricity. Julia made coffee at sunrise, but she didn't drink any. She just set the mug down beside mine and said, "We take this to Reed today. No waiting." I nodded. Waiting hadn't done us any favors so far. Reed wasn't expecting us that early, but one look at the brown folder in Julia's hands, and he ushered us straight into one of the back rooms. He closed the door behind him and sat across from us, elbows on the table, like he already knew the weight of what we were carrying. "You brought something," he said quietly. I slid the USB toward him. "You should hear the audio." He plugged it in, put on headphones, and clicked through the files. We sat in silence, me with my ribs aching, Julia with her hands clasped tight in her lap, until Reed finally pulled the headphones off. His expression had changed completely. No more calm professionalism. This was something else, something sharper. "Where did this come from?" he asked. "Glenn," I said. He still had access to an old archive sync Karen forgot to shut down. Reed swore under his breath. "This isn't HOA harassment. This is targeted surveillance, organized conspiracy, and premeditated violence. She didn't just come after you legally. She planned every step of this escalation." Julia lifted her chin. She was tracking me too. Reed nodded grimly. "Yes, and once surveillance crosses state lines or involves electronic transmission, the FBI can take it. And believe me, they will." He printed a formal evidence receipt and handed it to me. "This goes to the State Bureau and the federal office today. Don't worry about the rest. That's my sheet now." We thanked him and left, though thank you felt too small for what that USB contained. The next few days went by slowly, like waiting for a storm to either pass or break apart the sky. Reed emailed once, short, direct, just to say the federal office had acknowledged receipt of the files. Nothing else. Julia checked the cameras more often. I spent long hours on the porch, listening to the wind move through the pecan branches, and half expecting another pair of black uniforms to appear at the gate. They never did. But that didn't stop the memories of the attack from playing in my head like a broken reel. 4 days after handing over the USB, my phone buzzed. I didn't recognize the number at first, Illinois area code, but the name that appeared under it made me sit up straight. Alex Rose. I hadn't spoken to him properly in a decade. Old college friend, roommate once. He'd gone into federal law enforcement. I'd gone into fixing fences and keeping to myself. Life had drifted us like two pieces of wood in different streams. I answered on the second ring. "Danny," he said, "tell me you're sitting down." "I'm sitting." "Well, we got her." For a moment I didn't breathe. "Karen?" "Karen Little," he confirmed. "Chicago PD picked her up 3 nights ago." I blinked. "Chicago? What the hell was she doing there?" "Running a scam," he said. "Fake hazard insurance targeting elderly homeowners." Someone got suspicious. One of our detectives saw the ID photo, didn't match the name she gave. And he recognized her face from an alert that came through from Texas earlier this week. I didn't say anything. The air felt thicker. Alex continued. She used the same email pattern from her HOA days. Same username structure. Criminals get predictable. That's what finally tied her to both cases. I could hear him flipping papers on his end. "The USB you turned in? Danny, it didn't just close your case. It opened hers. Those audio recordings, the surveillance notes, the payments to those 2 thugs, It linked her to a pattern of behavior that goes back years. Fraud, elder exploitation, wire fraud attempts, operating under false IDs, interstate evasion. He paused, voice lowering. Texas wants her back for conspiracy, aggravated assault by proxy, and half a dozen other things. Julia stepped onto the porch beside me, searching my face for answers. She's facing 20 years minimum, Alex said. Probably more. I let out a long, uneven breath. Danny, Alex added quietly, I wanted you to hear it from me. What she did to you wasn't an isolated thing. You finally tugged the thread that unraveled her whole little empire. Julia sat next to me, taking my hand as I thanked him and ended the call. For a long moment, we just watched the street in silence. Nothing dramatic happened. No car speeding by, no stranger at the gate, no suspicious footsteps. Just the stillness of an ordinary afternoon. She's gone? Julia asked softly. For a long time, I said. Long enough. And for the first time in months, I realized I wasn't bracing for something terrible to happen. The fear wasn't gone completely, but it wasn't the one in charge anymore. 6 months passed. Not quickly, not dramatically, just naturally. Like the way a bruise fades. Slowly at first, then all at once you realize the ache isn't there anymore. By early summer, the pecan trees behind the house were in full leaf again. The yard smelled like warm earth and cut grass, the kind of scent that makes you stop on the porch for a moment just to breathe it in. The neighborhood had changed too, softer somehow, quieter. The tension that used to sit in the air like humidity had finally lifted. Julia was the one who suggested we host a small gathering. Just a few neighbors, she said. Something simple, a thank you dinner. I agreed. Honestly, after everything we had survived, the idea of hearing laughter on our lawn again felt like medicine. But word travels fast in a neighborhood that's learning how to be a community again. By the time we lit the grill, folding chairs were popping up like mushrooms after rain. Kids we'd barely spoken to before were running through the yard with sparklers. Someone set up a portable speaker, playing old country songs, Johnny Cash, Willie Nelson, the good stuff. It wasn't loud, it wasn't wild, it was human. I stood at the grill flipping chicken thighs when Mr. Brewster from down the road clapped me on the shoulder. Didn't think I'd ever see this house lively again, he said. Feels good. It does, I admitted. He nodded like a man who understood more than he was saying. Julia moved through the crowd with a pitcher of sweet tea, smiling, relaxed in a way I hadn't seen since before the first fake notice showed up in our mailbox. Every so often, she'd glance at the porch camera monitor. Old habits die hard, but there was no fear behind it anymore, just vigilance. Later that evening, I noticed something leaning against the gate, a wooden slab of polished oak, about 2 feet tall, hand-carved letters burned deep into the surface. This property is protected, legally and otherwise. I knew immediately who made it. The retired veteran 2 doors down, quiet man, kept to himself, but carved wooden signs as a hobby. He'd brought us soup when I'd been recovering, then disappeared back into his workshop like a hermit. I turned the sign over. No signature, no note, just craftsmanship and intention. Julia laughed when she saw it. We're hanging this up, she said, right by the mailbox. I didn't argue. I walked it over and mounted it on the post myself while the sky turned orange behind the trees. When I rejoined the group, someone handed me a plastic cup of sweet tea and pointed at the grill. Speech, Danny, a woman called out. I shook my head. No speeches, but they gathered around anyway. A semicircle of faces, neighbors who had once avoided eye contact, people who had looked away when Karen was at her peak, folks who'd apologized in their own awkward ways afterward. I cleared my throat. Well, we're still here, I said. That's something. A few chuckles. We got through a mess none of us asked for, and I'm not going to pretend it didn't leave marks, but we're here, we're talking to each other, and nobody's measuring grass height or fining people for wind chimes anymore. More laughter now, warm and honest. To good fences, someone shouted. And working cameras, someone else added. I raised my cup. To both, I said, and to knowing who your real neighbors are. They cheered. As the sun dipped below the tree line, little pockets of conversation rose around the yard. Someone passed a bowl of peach cobbler. A couple brought out lawn chairs and told old stories about the neighborhood, back when the HOA still meant bake sales and not fear. I sat down beside Julia near the fire pit. The glow warmed her face, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, she looked peaceful. "You think it's really over?" she asked gently. I thought about Karen in a holding cell states away, the broken trail of fraud she'd left behind, the fact that she had underestimated the wrong man on the wrong piece of land. "Yeah," I said. "I think it is." Julia leaned her head on my shoulder as the cicadas started up for the night. "It feels good," she whispered. "It does," I agreed. And in the quiet that followed, surrounded by neighbors, firelight, and the slow return of the life we almost lost, I realized something important. The house didn't feel like a battlefield anymore. It felt like home. As the last of the guests drifted home, and the glow from the fire pit faded to embers, I stood alone on the porch for a moment. The night air was cool, almost cold, the kind that brings clarity with it. The stars were sharp against the dark sky, and somewhere down the street, someone's wind chimes clinked lazily in the breeze. Julia came out with 2 mugs of warm cider and handed me one. "You okay?" she asked. "I am," I said, and I meant it. It struck me then how long it had been since I could say those words without hesitation. Months of fear, anger, courtrooms, police reports, hospital rooms, and late-night camera checks, all slowly dissolving into memory. We sat on the porch steps, shoulders touching, listening to the night settle in. "You know," she said softly, 6 months ago, I didn't think we'd ever get back to normal." I let out a quiet laugh. "I'm not sure this is normal, but it's ours." She smiled at that, leaning her head on my shoulder as her fingers traced circles on the mug. Inside the house, the lights glowed softly, the kind of glow that means safety, not just electricity. For a long while, neither of us spoke, and then Julia broke the silence with a question that had been sitting in both our minds. "You ever wonder, why us?" I thought about it. Karen had intimidated half the neighborhood, but she had chosen us. Maybe because we didn't fit her mold, maybe because my land wasn't under her thumb, maybe because I didn't bow as quickly as she expected. "Some people can't stand when someone tells them no," I finally said. Karen was one of them. Julia nodded slowly. "She picked the wrong family." I reached for her hand. She did. We stayed like that a few minutes longer, letting the quiet wrap around us. Then we stood, walked back inside, and locked the door, not out of fear, just habit. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the windows, painting warm stripes across the living room floor. I made coffee, slow, careful, ribs still a little stiff, and stepped out to grab the newspaper. Something new was at the gate, a single envelope, taped to the new wooden sign the veteran had carved, my name written in neat cursive. I hesitated a moment, then opened it. Inside was a simple note. "To the man who reminded us that fear only wins when good people stay silent. Your neighbors." Just that, no signatures, no fanfare, but it sat heavier in my chest than any award or recognition could have. I walked back inside, handed Julia the note. She read it slowly, eyes softening. "They're good people," she said. "They just needed a chance to act like it again." She slipped the note into a drawer, the same drawer where we kept photos, small keepsakes, reminders of the life we'd built long before any HOA tried to break it. Later that afternoon, I took a slow walk to the edge of our property, past the pecan trees, past the fence I'd repaired more times than I could count. The sun filtered through the branches, scattering warm patches of light along the path. For the first time in a year, I didn't feel the need to look over my shoulder. I didn't expect a black SUV. I didn't brace at every crunch of gravel. I didn't picture 2 men in uniforms waiting at the gate. All I felt was the steady rhythm of the breeze and the gentle sway of the leaves. When I got back to the house, Julia was sitting on the porch, reading. She looked up and smiled at me as if everything in the world was finally in the right place. And maybe it was. I sat down beside her, no words needed. Some battles end with sirens and handcuffs. Some end with a courtroom verdict. But the best ones, they end quietly, with a porch, a breeze, someone you love leaning against you. And the knowledge that the monsters that once stalked your life have been dragged into the light. As the sun lowered and the day thinned into evening, Julia reached for my hand again. "We're okay," she said. And for the first time in a long time, maybe the first time in a year, I could say it back without hesitation. "Yeah," I said, "we are." And that's how the storm ended. Not with thunder, but with peace.